Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we will journey back through the mists of time to the ancient islands of Japan, exploring the quiet, disciplined, and deeply fascinating world of the samurai warriors. Before the grand towering castles were built, and before the iconic horned helmets and sweeping armor took their final shapes, there was simply the land and the people who guarded it. Imagine a cold, damp morning in the deep, untamed forests of the Heian period. The sun has not yet crested the towering eastern mountains, and a thick blanket of pale white mist clings heavily to the moss-covered forest floor. The air is crisp and heavy, with the soothing scents of crushed pine needles, damp, dark earth, and the faint, sweet smoke of a distant charcoal fire warming a humble wooden home. In this incredibly quiet hour, long before the rest of the world awakes, a lone figure steps out onto the smooth wooden veranda of his rural estate. He breathes in the profound stillness of the morning. This man is the early ancestor of the samurai, though he does not yet call himself by that famous title. He is a provincial protector of the land, a guardian of his family's quiet agricultural estate, standing at the very edge of the wild frontier. He wears simple but elegant garments of woven hemp and raw silk dyed in subdued, earthy tones of deep indigo and forest green, colors pulled directly from the natural world that surrounds his home. The rough fabric rustles softly against itself as he walks slowly and deliberately toward the wooden stables, the gentle friction being the only sound breaking the immense, heavy silence of the early morning. In these early days of Japanese history, the warriors were not primarily swordsmen who fought on foot. They were elite horsemen, masters of the bow, whose entire lives were bound to the steady rhythm of their steeds and the immense tension of a drawn string. He approaches the wooden stall where his horse stands quietly in the shadows, its warm breath visible in the chilly, misty air. The warrior reaches out, his rough, calloused hand gently and affectionately stroking the thick, muscular neck of the beautiful animal. The bond between this early rider and his horse is profound, built on years of silent understanding, shared exhaustion, and shared breath in the remote, lonely corners of the eastern provinces. The warrior moves with a deliberate slowness, a quiet mindfulness that will one day evolve into the core foundation of the legendary samurai code. Every single action he takes is purposeful and unhurried. He begins to prepare his equipment for the day. He reaches to the wall and retrieves his longbow, an incredible, asymmetrical masterpiece, crafted from carefully laminated layers of wood and bamboo, bound tightly with thin strips of rattan and thickly lacquered to protect it from the relentless humidity of the Japanese climate. He runs his fingertips slowly along the smooth, cool surface of the curved weapon, feeling the immense latent power resting silently within the layers of wood. This bow is much taller than he is, designed specifically with a gripped, positioned low on the arc, so it can be gracefully fired from the back of a galloping horse, an art form that requires years of unwavering dedication and intense muscle memory. The distinct, sharp scent of the lacquer mixes with the earthy smell of the stable, creating a comforting, grounding aroma that anchors the warrior to his daily duty. As the morning mist begins to thin slightly, revealing the faint, jagged silhouettes of the distant mountain peaks, he steps out into the swept dirt courtyard. The vast sky above him turns from a deep, velvety indigo to a soft, bruised purple as dawn approaches. He gracefully draws a long wooden arrow from his woven quiver, the stiff feathers of an eagle brushing softly against his wrist. He stands perfectly still in the courtyard, his bare feet planted firmly on the cool, damp earth, rooting himself downward like the ancient cedar trees that surround his home. He closes his eyes and listens to the waking world. He hears the gentle rustle of the morning wind moving through the high, invisible branches, the distant, rhythmic rushing of a cold mountain stream tumbling over smooth stones in the valley, and the steady, calming, rhythmic beat of his own heart. Slowly, he raises the massive bow, pushing the grip forward with his left hand, while pulling the string back past his ear with his right, the heavy wood groaning softly under the immense building tension. He holds the draw, suspended in a beautiful moment of pure, focused stillness. For this early warrior, archery is not just a martial skill used for combat, but a moving meditation, a way to perfectly align his spirit with the vast, quiet breathing of the natural world around him. He does not release the arrow. Instead, he slowly and gently lowers the bow, letting the terrible tension slip away harmlessly into the morning air, deeply satisfied with the perfect harmony of his mind and body. The day has officially begun. He turns and walks slowly back toward the main house, his footsteps muffled by the soft, damp earth. Inside the dim home, the square hearth has been brought to life by the servants. The soft, glowing orange embers cast long, warm, dancing shadows against the sliding paper doors. He kneels gracefully on the woven tatami mat, the dry, golden reeds whispering faintly under his weight. A small, simple morning meal is placed before him in quiet reverence. Steaming white rice, a small piece of salted fish, and a dark bowl of hot, clear broth made from ocean kelp and dried forest mushrooms. He eats slowly and silently, tasting every single grain of rice, intimately aware of the immense, back-breaking labor required to cultivate the flooded rice paddies that pattern the foggy valleys below his estate. To be a warrior in this era is to be deeply, fundamentally tied to the agricultural cycle, to the heavy rains that flood the fields and the warm sun that ripens the autumn harvest. His entire life is dedicated to protecting this fragile, essential rhythm of growth and survival. After the quiet meal, it is time to inspect his armor. In these ancient times, the armor of the mounted archer is a magnificent, heavy, and incredibly complex creation, known as the O-yoroi, or the Great Armor. It rests patiently on a polished wooden stand in the corner of the shadowy room, looking like a sleeping, square-shouldered beast waiting to be awakened. He approaches it with the gentle respect one might offer a wise elder. The O-yoroi is not a solid, shining shell of metal, but rather it is constructed from thousands of small, individual, rectangular scales, made of thick iron and hardened leather. Each tiny scale has been meticulously painted with layers of thick, protective black lacquer to prevent the damp, salty Japanese climate, from rusting the iron to dust. He gently picks up a hanging sleeve, feeling the surprising weight and the remarkable flexibility of the intricate construction. The true, breathtaking beauty of this ancient armor lies in the elaborate system of silk lacing that binds these hundreds of hard scales together. The thick silk cords are dyed in vibrant, deeply symbolic colors. His personal armor features tightly woven silk in shades of deep crimson and dark indigo, colors deliberately chosen to evoke the falling leaves of autumn and the deep, unfathomable depths of the surrounding ocean. He runs his fingers softly over the intricate diamond patterns created by the precise overlapping laces. Every single knot has been tied by hand by highly skilled, patient artisans in the distant capital, a painstaking process taking many months of quiet, dedicated labor. The armor is not merely physical protection, it is a profound work of art. A beautiful, heavy symbol of his family's long lineage and their enduring commitment to their martial duty. He lifts the heavy chest piece slightly, admiring how the lacquered leather gleams softly in the dim, flickering light of the indoor hearth fire. When worn, this specific armor creates a wide, boxy, almost imposing silhouette, specifically designed to protect a man while seated squarely on a horse. The large, heavy shoulder guards acting as mobile shields against incoming volleys of enemy arrows. He leaves the heavy armor resting on its wooden stand, for there is no battle to fight today. Today is for practice, for maintaining the quiet, internal discipline that defines his lonely existence. He steps back outside into the warming air. The sun has finally broken brilliantly over the eastern mountain ridge, casting long, spectacular golden beams of light stretching through the heavy green forest canopy. The morning mist is rapidly dissolving into the warm air, leaving behind millions of tiny diamonds of dew, clinging desperately to the delicate green fronds of the forest ferns. He walks past the wooden stables and follows a narrow, winding dirt path that leads much deeper into the dense forest, walking toward a small, secluded clearing where the massive trees eventually give way to a perfectly flat expanse of soft, emerald green moss. This quiet, hidden place is his personal training ground, his peaceful sanctuary, completely away from the noisy demands of running the agricultural estate. In the exact center of this mossy clearing stands a simple, thick target made of tightly woven straw, resting on a basic wooden frame. He stands exactly 50 paces away from it, closing his eyes once more to settle his breathing into a slow, deep rhythm. The long path of the samurai is firmly rooted in the ancient concept of mushin, or no mind. It is a highly sought-after state of profound mental clarity, entirely free from distracting anger, paralyzing fear, or even the desire for a specific successful outcome. He deeply seeks to quiet the endless, noisy chatter of his own human thoughts, trying to become as empty and entirely still as a perfectly polished silver mirror, reflecting the vast open sky. He slowly draws the great bow. The physical movement is completely fluid, like clear water pouring smoothly from a hollowed stone basin. The wooden arrow rests lightly against his thumb. He does not aim with his eyes, but rather with his entire physical being, feeling the distant straw target as if it were an extension of his own body. The release of the string is barely a conscious decision. The thick bowstring sings a sharp, clear, musical note that echoes briefly in the quiet forest. The arrow flies perfectly true, burying itself deep into the exact center of the tightly bound straw target with a highly satisfying, muffled thud. He does not smile with pride, nor does he show any frustration if he misses. He simply reaches his hand back for another long arrow, returning his focus immediately to his breathing, returning completely to the absolute stillness of the present moment. The ancient forest watches him, silent, towering, and enduring. The massive cedar trees have stood in this spot for centuries, witnessing the incredibly slow passage of time, the changing of the many seasons, and the quiet, solitary dedication of the men who practice their deadly arts in the dappled green shadows below. He will spend many hours in this clearing, repeating the exact same drawing motion, over and over again, until it is no longer an action he consciously performs, but rather a completely natural, effortless expression of who he fundamentally is. As the peaceful morning slowly stretches toward noon, the still air grows much warmer, carrying the sweet scent of wild mountain orchids and the deep, rich, earthy smell of the damp forest floor baking in the sun. He finally lowers his heavy bow, his breathing completely slow and perfectly even. The very first steps on the incredibly long road of samurai history have been taken right here. Not in the loud, terrifying chaos of a bloody battlefield, but in the peaceful, solitary, rhythmic repetition of a dedicated master, gently honing his craft beneath the ancient, silent trees. He walks quietly back to the estate as the sun climbs to its highest point, the brilliant golden light softening into a bright, hazy, and sleepy afternoon. The daily sounds of the busy household have finally begun to stir in earnest. Servants whisper softly to one another as they carry heavy woven baskets of root vegetables from the terraced gardens, and the distant, rhythmic, soothing thumping of wet cotton cloth being washed against smooth stones at the river echoes faintly through the warm valley. Yet the warrior remains completely encased in his own quiet, impenetrable atmosphere of calm duty. He sits gracefully on the wooden veranda once again, this time holding a soft cotton cloth and a small, delicate wooden box containing finely ground white powder and thick, pale oil. He rests his long, straight sword horizontally across his lap. In this very early era of Japanese history, the iconic, deeply curved katana sword has not yet been forged. The warriors of this time carry the chokuto, a straight, single-edged iron blade, designed primarily for downward piercing from the back of a horse. He carefully unties the soft silk cord, securing the sword in its lacquered wooden scabbard, and slowly, reverently draws the polished blade. The cool steel whispers softly as it meets the warm afternoon air. He sprinkles a tiny, precise amount of the fine white polishing powder onto the metal, using a soft, thick piece of folded paper to gently and rhythmically buff the flat surface. This special powder, called uchiko, carefully removes the old, sticky oil and any microscopic, unseen impurities that may have settled on the sensitive steel, since it was last cleaned. The comforting, slightly spicy scent of pure clove oil rises softly into the warm air as he begins to apply a fresh, completely even protective coat to the entire length of the blade. He treats this deadly weapon with the absolute utmost reverence and care. It is not merely a tool of violence to him, but a deeply sacred family heirloom, a highly polished, physical manifestation of his personal honor and his ancestors' watching spirits. He quietly watches the afternoon sunlight ripple and dance along the wavy temper line of the steel, deeply admiring the subtle, cloudy, almost watery patterns forged directly into the hard metal by a master smith who worked over a roaring charcoal forge many decades ago. The slow, steady rhythm of his hands moving carefully along the blade is incredibly hypnotic, serving as a physical prayer of maintenance, respect, and quiet meditation. As the lazy afternoon slowly bleeds into a quiet evening, the vast sky transforms into a brilliant, breathtaking canvas of burnt orange, deep rose, and soft, fading violet. The dark shadows of the tall pine trees stretch incredibly long and thin across the swept dirt courtyard, signaling the end of the day. The warrior finally sheathes his perfectly clean, freshly oiled straight sword and walks inside to place it carefully on a horizontal wooden rack inside his dim, quiet chambers. The simple evening meal is taken in the exact same profound, respectful silence as the morning, followed by a long, uninterrupted time of quiet internal reflection. He sits cross-legged on the soft tatami mat, facing the open, darkening garden, where the very first glowing fireflies have just begun to drift like tiny, magical, floating lanterns through the gathering dusk. The evening air cools rapidly, bringing back the sharp, clean scent of the high mountains. He sits completely still, watching the comforting darkness slowly consume the surrounding landscape, letting his busy mind empty itself once more into the void. He is a man caught delicately between the fleeting, heartbreaking beauty of the natural world and the enduring, harsh reality of his strict martial duties. In this incredibly quiet twilight hour, sitting under the gentle rhythmic hum of the summer crickets and listening to the distant, lonely call of a night bird settling into the trees, he finds his peace. The night deepens over the ancient estate, wrapping the wooden buildings in a blanket of absolute, undisturbed darkness. The air grows cold, signaling the slow, inevitable approach of winter. Our warrior does not immediately retire to his sleeping mats. Instead, he shifts his position closer to a small, low wooden writing desk, illuminated by the faint, flickering golden glow of a single oil lamp. The flame dances delicately on the wick, casting long, wavering shadows across the smooth paper screens. In this quiet, solitary space, he practices an art just as vital to his spirit as the bow or the blade. He prepares his calligraphy tools. The preparation of the ink is a slow, methodical ritual, requiring the exact same focus and perfect breathing as his morning archery. He pours a few precious drops of fresh water into the shallow, dark depression of a smooth slate inkstone. Taking a solid rectangular stick of pure black pine soot ink, he begins to grind it in slow, continuous circles against the wet stone. The soft, rhythmic scraping sound is incredibly soothing, a gentle, hypnotic lullaby that fills the quiet room. The scent of the pine soot is rich, earthy, and slightly sweet, grounding his mind in the present moment. He grinds the ink patiently until the water transforms into a pool of deep, glossy obsidian. He lifts a delicate brush made of soft wolf hair and bamboo, dipping the tip carefully into the dark pool. He breathes in deeply, letting the cool night air fill his lungs, and as he exhales, he brings the brush down onto a sheet of thick, textured mulberry paper. The warrior knows that a man devoted only to the harsh arts of war is a man out of balance. He must cultivate the dual way of the pen and the sword, softening his hardened spirit with the quiet beauty of poetry and the elegant, flowing strokes of the written word. He paints a short, evocative poem about the falling autumn leaves, his brush moving with the same fluid, decisive grace as his polished weapon. The dark ink bleeds slightly into the soft fibers of the paper, freezing a fleeting moment of natural beauty onto the page forever. As the weeks pass, the final, brilliant, red leaves of the maple trees are stripped away by the biting northern winds, leaving the forest bare and quiet under a heavy, suffocating sky. The first snow of the season begins to fall, delicate, feathery white flakes drifting lazily down from the grey clouds, covering the swept dirt courtyard and the thatched roofs in a pristine, glittering blanket of white. The entire world seems to hold its breath, muffled and hushed by the deep snow. It is during this frozen, quiet season that the warrior must make a necessary journey. He needs a new blade, not the straight chokuto of his ancestors, but something new, something forged with a slight, elegant curve to better suit the fluid motion of a quick draw from horseback. He leaves the estate wrapped tightly in thick layers of heavy wool and fur, riding his sturdy horse slowly up a steep, winding mountain path. The cold air bites at his cheeks, and the horse's hooves crunch softly through the fresh snow, leaving a solitary, wandering trail behind them. They travel deep into the remote mountains, toward a hidden valley where a master swordsmith lives in intentional, isolated seclusion. The smith's forge is a sacred place, built over a rushing mountain stream and surrounded by ropes of twisted rice straw, decorated with zigzagging white paper streamers, marking the area as purified and holy. Upon arriving, the warrior is greeted not with words, but with the steady, rhythmic, deafening crash of heavy iron hammers striking glowing steel. The forge is a dark, incredibly hot, and smoky cavern, completely dominated by the roaring, brilliant orange flames of the charcoal fire. The master smith, wearing a pristine white robe to symbolize purity, works in a deep, almost trance-like state of concentration. The warrior sits quietly on a wooden bench in the shadows, mesmerized by the hypnotic, brutal beauty of the forging process. He watches as the smith takes a raw, jagged block of precious tamahagine steel, a special, highly refined iron sand, smelted over 3 exhausting days and nights in a massive clay furnace. The block is heated in the roaring fire until it glows a blinding, brilliant yellow-white, matching the heat of a captured star. The smith and his apprentices strike the glowing metal with massive hammers, flattening it folding it perfectly over upon itself, and welding it back together in the fire. They repeat this incredibly exhausting, rhythmic process time and time again, fold after fold after fold. This constant folding removes invisible impurities and creates thousands of microscopic layers within the steel, giving the blade an astonishing, resilient flexibility that prevents it from shattering in the chaos of battle. The sound of the hammers is a powerful, primal drumbeat echoing through the snowy valley, a terrifying and beautiful song of creation born from fire and iron. The warrior watches for days, entering a meditative state, simply by listening to the rhythmic, metallic ringing. He observes the most critical and delicate moment of the blade's birth, the application of the clay. The master smith, using a highly secret, fiercely guarded family recipe, paints a thick, wet mixture of clay, water, and crushed stone over the spine of the cooled, shaped blade, leaving only a very thin layer along the sharp cutting edge. The room grows incredibly tense. The fires are stoked to a specific, roaring heat, judged entirely by the precise color of the glowing coals in the dark room. The smith plunges the clay-coated sword back into the fierce fire. He watches the metal heat, his eyes reflecting the dancing orange flames. When the steel reaches the absolute perfect temperature, glowing the exact color of a setting autumn sun, he pulls it from the fire and immediately violently plunges it into a long wooden trough of cold, fresh mountain water. A massive cloud of hissing, blinding white steam erupts into the cold air. This violent, sudden cooling causes the exposed edge of the blade to harden into a terrifying, diamond-like sharpness, while the thicker clay on the spine allows the back of the sword to cool much slower, retaining a softer, shock-absorbing flexibility. The immense, conflicting thermal pressures within the steel force the blade to bend upward, creating the graceful, iconic curve of the legendary Tachi sword. When the steam finally clears, the smith lifts the blackened blade from the water. Even covered in soot, the warrior can see the faint, beautiful, wavy line separating the hard edge from the softer spine, a frozen record of the exact moment the steel met the water. This is the hamon, the true soul of the sword, born in the quiet, snowy mountains, through fire, water, and incredible human patience. The master smith hands the rough, blackened blade over to another artisan, the polisher. The warrior stays in the snowy valley to watch this painfully slow, entirely silent process. The polisher sits cross-legged on a low wooden platform, holding the bare blade over a wooden bucket of cold water. He uses a progression of small, progressively finer whetstones, constantly dripping water over the steel to wash away the tiny metal shavings. The rough, scratching sound of the coarse stones against the steel is slow and rhythmic, blending perfectly with the sound of the freezing mountain stream outside. The polisher works for weeks on this single blade, rubbing the stones back and forth, day after day, slowly removing the dark scale of the forge to reveal the brilliant hidden beauty of the steel underneath. As he moves to the incredibly fine, final polishing stones, the sound changes to a soft, silky whisper. The true character of the metal is finally brought into the light. The warrior watches the surface of the blade, transform into a flawless, mirror-like finish reflecting the grey, snowy light of the open window. The intricate grain pattern of the folded steel, looking exactly like the swirling grain of ancient dark wood, becomes highly visible. The wavy temper line, the hamon, stands out brilliantly, resembling a misty, rolling mountain landscape trapped forever inside the freezing metal. When the sword is finally completed, it is fitted with a temporary, plain wooden resting scabbard. The warrior bows deeply to the exhausted artisans, a gesture of profound, silent respect for the immense, life-draining labor they have poured into this weapon. He pays them generously with bags of polished white rice from his own estate's autumn harvest, trading the life-giving product of his land for an instrument of death. He carefully wraps the wooden scabbard in thick, soft silk and mounts his horse for the long, freezing journey back down the mountain. The snowfall has intensified, creating a mesmerizing, dizzying curtain of white, falling silently through the towering, dark pine trees. The forest is completely devoid of sound, the heavy snow absorbing every echo, every rustling branch. The warrior rides with his eyes half closed, feeling the comforting, familiar rhythm of his horse's steady gait. The incredible, biting cold of the winter air forces his mind into a state of absolute clarity, leaving absolutely no room for wandering thoughts or distractions. He is hyper-aware of the incredible, terrifying sharpness resting quietly against his side, a beautiful, deadly piece of frozen fire forged in the lonely heights of the mountains. He returns to his quiet estate just as the deep, dark violet shadows of dusk begin to stretch across the snow-covered courtyard. The warm, inviting orange glow of the hearth fire seeps through the tiny cracks in the wooden shutters, a desperately welcome sight after the freezing isolation of the journey. He dismounts gracefully, his stiff, frozen muscles aching slightly from the cold ride. He leads his loyal horse back into the warm, familiar darkness of the stables, carefully rubbing the animal down with dry, woven straw, removing the melting snow from its thick winter coat. The sweet, comforting smell of the dry straw and the warm, living breath of the horse provide a deeply grounding contrast to the cold, dead perfection of the steel he now carries. He walks slowly toward the main house, his bare feet sinking deep into the powdery white snow, leaving a single purposeful set of tracks leading to the wooden veranda. He slides the heavy wooden door open, stepping out of the freezing, unforgiving winter night and back into the quiet, sheltered warmth of his solitary life. Inside, the air is thick with the soothing, smoky scent of roasting green tea leaves. A servant silently offers him a small, rough-hewn clay cup filled with the hot, bitter liquid. He holds the cup in both hands, letting the comforting heat slowly seep into his frozen, aching fingers. He sips the tea slowly, the rich, earthy taste warming him from the inside out. He sits by the square hearth, the gentle, crackling sound of the burning wood, mixing with the soft, muffled howling of the winter wind outside the thin paper walls. The estate feels entirely isolated, a tiny, warm island floating in a vast, frozen ocean of snow and darkness. He unwraps the silk bundle, resting the plain wooden scabbard gently on the soft tatami mat. He does not draw the blade tonight. The incredible, chaotic energy of the forge must be allowed to settle. The new spirit of the sword must rest and acclimate to the quiet peace of its new home. He simply sits in the dim, flickering light, feeling a profound, heavy sense of responsibility settle over his shoulders. This new, curved blade represents a significant shift in his world, a move toward faster, more dynamic mounted warfare that will eventually reshape his life. But tonight, there is no conflict. There is only the falling snow, the crackling fire, and the deep, restorative sleep that eventually claims the weary warrior, his steady, slow breathing joining the timeless, quiet rhythm of the ancient winter night. The heavy winter morning dawns with a blinding, pristine brilliance. The terrible storm of the previous night has finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a completely transformed world. The sky is an impossible, piercing shade of clear azure, completely devoid of even a single wispy cloud. The vast, unbroken blanket of deep snow covering the estate reflects the harsh, bright morning sunlight so intensely that the warrior must narrow his eyes to mere slits as he slides open the heavy wooden veranda doors. The cold air that rushes into his quiet, dim chambers is incredibly sharp and clean, carrying the faint, metallic scent of frozen pine needles and untouched ice. He exhales slowly, his warm breath pluming in the freezing air like the smoke from a dying incense stick. The new sword, still resting in its temporary, unadorned wooden resting scabbard, sits perfectly still on the soft tatami mat behind him. The blade has been born in the roaring mountain forge, but it is not yet complete. It is merely a naked soul that must now be properly clothed before it can be worn into the world. This delicate, time-consuming process will occupy the long, slow, snowbound months of the quiet winter season. Later that morning, the warrior receives a quiet visitor to the estate, an elderly, stooped artisan who specializes entirely in the highly meticulous craft of carving sword mounts. The old man enters the warm main house respectfully, shaking the loose, powdery snow from his thick straw boots before stepping onto the wooden floors. He carries a small, worn wooden chest containing an array of incredibly sharp, delicate chisels and small hand planes. The two men sit facing each other across the square hearth, sharing a silent cup of steaming green tea before the important work begins. The artisan carefully unwraps a long, perfectly straight block of pale, lightweight magnolia wood. This specific wood is chosen with the utmost care because it contains absolutely no natural acids or resins that could slowly corrode the sensitive steel of the sword over the long years. It is incredibly soft and yields willingly to the sharp edge of a chisel, yet it is strong enough to protect the deadly blade within. The old man measures the curve of the naked steel with his weathered, practiced hands, memorizing the exact sweep and thickness of the metal. The artisan begins to carefully split the block of magnolia wood perfectly down the center. He uses a series of incredibly sharp, curved chisels to slowly, rhythmically hollow out the interior of the two wooden halves. The sound is a soft, highly satisfying scraping noise, a gentle rhythmic whisper that fills the quiet room as tiny, pale ribbons of shaved wood fall softly onto the tatami mat. He works with agonizing slowness, constantly placing the bare blade into the hollowed channel to check the exact fit. The wood must embrace the steel perfectly, snug enough so that the sword does not rattle even slightly when the warrior rides at a full gallop, yet loose enough that the blade can be drawn instantly without the slightest resistance. It is a game of microscopic tolerances played out entirely by the quiet feeling in the old man's sensitive fingertips. The warrior sits nearby for hours, watching the slow, methodical process with deep appreciation. The sweet, faint scent of the freshly carved magnolia wood fills the warm air, mingling pleasantly with the smell of the wood smoke from the hearth. Once the interior channel is carved to absolute perfection, the artisan uses a thick, natural glue made from boiled rice paste to tightly bind the two halves of the wooden scabbard back together. He tightly wraps the joined wood in strong cords and leaves it to dry for many days. When the glue has finally cured, the true outer shaping begins. He uses small hand planes to shave away the excess wood, shaping the scabbard into a sleek, elegant oval that perfectly mirrors the deep, sweeping curve of the steel hidden within. But the raw wood is highly vulnerable to the damp, relentless moisture of the Japanese climate. It must be sealed and protected by the long, dangerous, and incredibly beautiful process of lacquering. The warrior brings the carved scabbard to a different craftsman, a master of the highly toxic sap of the lacquer tree. The lacquer artisan works in a completely isolated, dust-free room, as even a single speck of dirt floating in the air can ruin a flawless finish. The raw sap is highly caustic, capable of raising severe, painful blisters on human skin, yet the master handles it with a fearless, practiced grace. The lacquer artisan applies the first base coat, a thick, dark, muddy mixture of raw sap and finely crushed clay, brushing it onto the wooden scabbard in slow, even strokes. The strange, fascinating secret of Japanese lacquer is that it does not dry in the heat or the sun. It only cures in an environment of extremely high humidity. The freshly painted scabbard is placed carefully inside a special damp wooden cabinet to harden in the dark. This curing process takes many long days. When it is finally hard, the artisan uses rough charcoal to sand the surface completely flat and smooth. Then, he applies another, painstakingly thin layer of pure, refined black lacquer. Back into the damp, dark cabinet it goes. This slow, incredibly patient cycle of painting, curing in the dark humidity, and sanding with charcoal is repeated dozens of times over the course of several freezing winter months. With every single microscopic layer, the deep black finish becomes richer, deeper, and more lustrous. By the time the heavy winter snows finally begin to melt, the scabbard has transformed into a breathtaking, flawless black mirror, so perfectly polished that the warrior can clearly see his own calm reflection in its curved, dark surface. While the scabbard slowly cures in the dark, another highly skilled craftsman arrives at the estate to construct the sword's hilt. The wooden core of the hilt is carved with the exact same slower precision as the scabbard, ensuring it fits perfectly over the unpolished tang of the steel blade. But plain wood provides no secure grip for a warrior's sweating hands in the terrifying chaos of a battle. To solve this, the craftsman wraps the wooden core entirely in a single, beautiful panel of pure white ray skin. Imported at great expense from the distant, warm southern oceans, the ray skin is covered in thousands of tiny, hard calcium nodules that look exactly like miniature, glowing white pearls. This rough, incredibly durable texture will prevent the silk wrapping from slipping even a fraction of an inch. Over this pearlescent skin, the artisan places two small, highly detailed metal ornaments. These beautiful little sculptures, carved from dark copper and bright gold, depict fierce, coiling dragons. They are positioned precisely where the warrior's fingers will naturally rest, filling the empty space in his palm and helping to perfectly align his grip without him ever needing to look down. The final, most hypnotic step is the wrapping of the hilt. The artisan uses long, thin strands of incredibly strong, flat silk braid, dyed in a deep, rich indigo, to match the warrior's heavy armor. He sits cross-legged on the floor, securing the hilt against his knees. With intense concentration, he begins to tightly weave the silk cord back and forth across the rough white ray skin. His fingers move in a complex, repetitive dance, pinching, twisting, and pulling the silk with astonishing strength. Each precise fold creates a perfect, tight diamond shape, allowing the white pearlescent nodules of the ray skin to peek beautifully through the dark blue silk. The artisan pulls the cords so incredibly tight that his knuckles turn completely white, ensuring that the heavy wrapping will never loosen, no matter how violently the sword is swung. The slow, rhythmic sound of the stiff silk being pulled taut fills the room, a quiet testament to the enduring strength and absolute dedication woven directly into the warrior's most vital tool. When the heavy snows finally begin to recede, exposing patches of damp, dark earth, in the warming courtyard, the new curved sword is completely assembled. The warrior holds the finished weapon for the very first time. It is a stunning, terrifying masterpiece of human artistry and deadly function. He ties a thick silk cord to his belt, suspending the curved sword with the sharp edge facing downward, the traditional method for drawing a long blade, while seated high on a galloping horse. He steps out into the muddy, thawing courtyard. The bright spring air is crisp and filled with the smell of wet earth and returning life. He stands perfectly still, adjusting his posture to the new weight resting comfortably at his hip. He closes his eyes, sinking back into the profound, empty silence of his moving meditation. He inhales the cold air deeply, and in one incredibly sudden, completely fluid motion, his left hand pulls the black, lacquered scabbard slightly back, while his right hand grasps the indigo silk hilt, drawing the long, curved blade from its dark resting place. The newly polished steel rings with a beautiful, sharp, incredibly clear, metallic whisper as it slices through the cold spring air. The sweeping curve of the blade naturally follows the motion of his arm, feeling entirely different from the heavy, straight, piercing swords of his ancestors. It is faster, more elegant, and infinitely more deadly in a wide, slashing arc. He moves slowly through the empty courtyard, practicing a series of deliberate, sweeping cuts against the invisible shadows. His footwork is perfectly grounded in the slippery, thawing mud, his body moving in perfect harmony with the sweeping arcs of the shining steel. The brilliant spring sunlight catches the wavy, misty temper line along the incredibly sharp edge, flashing like captured lightning as the blade cuts silently through the air. He is no longer just an archer on horseback. He is slowly evolving into the legendary swordsman of history. He stops his quiet, solitary dance, holding the long blade perfectly still in front of him. The only sound is the heavy, rhythmic thumping of water dripping from the melting snow on the thatched roof. With a smooth, practiced flick of his wrist, he cleanly returns the long blade to the perfectly fitted, dark wooden scabbard, the heavy metal sliding home with a deeply satisfying, resonant click that echoes softly across the quiet, awakening valley. The resonant click of the heavy steel sliding perfectly into the dark, lacquered scabbard signals not just the end of his quiet morning practice, but the true, undeniable turning of the season. The harsh, biting winds that once howled through the valley have completely surrendered, replaced by a soft, warm breeze that carries the incredibly sweet, intoxicating fragrance of damp earth and sudden, explosive, blooming life. In the span of just a few short weeks, the stark, monochrome world of white snow and dark pine transforms into a vibrant, overwhelming canvas of emerald greens, soft pinks, and brilliant azures. The terraced fields that carve their way down the steep valley walls, once frozen solid under thick ice, are now flooded with cold, clear meltwater rushing down from the high mountain peaks. These flooded rice paddies become thousands of perfect, glassy mirrors reflecting the vast blue sky and the fluffy, wandering white clouds, turning the entire valley floor into a dazzling, fragmented mosaic of light. The warrior changes his heavy winter garments for lighter, highly breathable robes of fine woven hemp, dyed in the soft, pale green of new willow leaves. He walks away from the busy main house, following a worn stone path that leads to a small, raised hill overlooking the sweeping agricultural valley. At the very crest of this gentle hill stands a truly massive, ancient weeping cherry tree. Its incredibly thick, gnarled trunk is covered in dark, rough bark twisting upward for decades to support a sprawling canopy of delicate, weeping branches. As the warm spring sun touches the tightly furled buds, the tree erupts into a breathtaking, blinding cloud of pale, pink blossoms. The warrior sits quietly on a simple wooden bench beneath the sweeping canopy, enveloped in a soft, luminous pink twilight created by the millions of tiny flowers, filtering the afternoon sun. He holds a shallow, unglazed clay bowl of hot tea, resting his hands in his lap, simply watching the delicate blossoms sway and tremble in the gentle, fragrant breeze. For the emerging samurai class, the cherry blossom is not merely a beautiful flower, but a profound, heavily symbolic reflection of their own dangerous existence. The sakura does not cling desperately to the branch when its time has come. At the absolute height of its breathtaking beauty, it willingly lets go, allowing the wind to carry it away in a swirling, graceful dance toward the earth. This is the concept of mono no aware, the deeply beautiful, melancholic awareness of the impermanence of all things. The warrior watches a single, perfectly formed pink petal detach from the branch above, drifting down in a lazy, spiraling circle until it lands soundlessly on the still surface of his green tea. He stares at the delicate petal floating in the dark liquid. He understands deeply that his own life, bound strictly to the harsh, unforgiving blade resting at his side, is just as fragile and just as transient. He must live with the constant, quiet acceptance that any day could be his last. And therefore, he must strive to live every single moment with the exact same pure, unblemished perfection as the falling blossom. Down in the flooded, muddy valley below, the intensely grueling work of the spring planting season has begun in earnest. The agricultural heart of the estate is beating with a fierce, rhythmic energy. Men and women, their simple clothing rolled up high above their knees, wade deep into the thick, freezing mud of the paddies. They move in a long, organized line, working backward, step by step, their hands constantly moving in a rapid, repetitive rhythm as they press tiny, bright green rice seedlings deep into the submerged earth. As they work, they sing ancient, rhythmic planting songs, their voices carrying clearly across the still water, rising and falling in a soothing, hypnotic chant that perfectly paces their exhausting labor. The warrior stands up from his wooden bench, moving to the edge of the hill to watch his people work. He does not step into the mud himself, for his hands are shaped by the heavy calouses of the bowstring and the sword hilt, but his entire existence is entirely dependent on the incredibly heavy labor happening below him. The wealth and power of a samurai are not measured in heavy gold coins, but in koku, a specific volume of rice calculated to feed one adult man for an entire year. Every single green shoot being pressed into the mud represents the literal lifeblood of his family, his retainers, and his strict martial authority. The spring season, however, brings more than just the beautiful cherry blossoms and the vital rice planting. It also thaws the high mountain passes, bringing the inevitable return of wandering bandits and territorial disputes between rival, land-hungry clans. His duty as the protector of this quiet valley must be actively enforced. The warrior returns to the stables, the warm spring air buzzing with the sound of busy insects. He saddles his strong, loyal horse, fitting the animal with intricate, beautifully crafted tack made of strong, braided leather and bright crimson silk tassels that swing rhythmically against the horse's muscular chest. He wears no heavy armor today, only his light, pale green hemp robes, but the new curved sword is securely tied to his waist, its dark, lacquered scabbard gleaming ominously in the bright sun. He mounts the horse with a smooth, practiced leap, settling comfortably into the deep wooden saddle. With a gentle squeeze of his knees, he guides the powerful animal out of the main gates of the estate, beginning a long, solitary patrol along the rugged, forested borders of his family's vast territory. The dirt path leads them rapidly away from the bright, open, flooded fields and plunges them deeply into the mysterious, shadowy edge of a massive, ancient bamboo forest. The transition is incredibly abrupt and deeply atmospheric. The bright, warm sunlight is instantly choked off, replaced by a cool, strange, emerald green twilight. The bamboo stalks, thicker than a man's thigh and towering impossibly high into the sky, grow incredibly close together, creating a vast, dense, impenetrable wooden wall of vibrant green. As the warm spring breeze sweeps through the upper canopy of the forest, the millions of long, thin bamboo leaves rustle together, creating a sound exactly like a massive rushing river. The tall, hollow stalks sway and bend, occasionally knocking heavily against one another, with a deep, hollow, resonant toque that echoes endlessly through the dim, green corridors. The air in here is heavy, damp, and smells strongly of incredibly rich, dark soil and the sharp, clean scent of growing green wood. The warrior rides slowly, the soft thud of his horse's hooves, perfectly muffled by the thick, spongy layer of decaying yellow leaves covering the narrow dirt path. He is completely alone in the dense green shadows, but his senses are pushed to their absolute limits, expanding outward into the rustling forest. He rides with his back perfectly straight, his eyes scanning the dense clusters of green stalks for any unnatural movement, any shadow that does not belong to the swaying trees. His left hand rests lightly and naturally on the dark, indigo silk wrap of his sword hilt, his thumb resting gently against the heavy iron handguard, ready to push the blade free at a fraction of a second's notice. The incredible silence of the samurai is not merely an absence of speech. It is a state of hyper-awareness, a deep, active listening to the incredibly complex, overlapping rhythms of the natural world, constantly searching for the single, jarring note of danger. A sudden, sharp crack of a breaking branch deep in the woods causes the horse to twitch, its ears backward nervously, its muscles tensing beneath the warrior's legs. The warrior does not pull the reins or shout. He simply stops, becoming as still and silent as the ancient stones hidden in the moss. He waits in the emerald gloom, his breathing incredibly slow, his eyes fixed on the dark spaces between the towering green stalks, completely prepared to draw the beautiful, deadly steel he spent the long winter forging, protecting the quiet, peaceful valley, blooming brightly in the sun behind him. The terrible, heavy silence in the emerald gloom stretches into an eternity, every single second magnified by the rhythmic, thumping heartbeat in the warrior's chest. He does not move a single muscle, his gaze piercing the dark, shadowy gaps between the towering bamboo stalks. Slowly, a massive, low shadow shifts heavily in the dense undergrowth. A low, wet grunting sound breaks the tension, followed by the incredibly loud, snapping crunch of dry bamboo roots being violently torn from the earth. Out of the green twilight emerges not a bandit, but a truly massive wild mountain boar. Its thick, bristly fur is caked entirely in layers of dried, grey mud, acting as a natural armor against the sharp thorns of the forest floor. The enormous beast pauses, its small, dark eyes catching the faint light as it sniffs the damp air, completely ignoring the mounted warrior frozen just a few paces away. It gives one final, dismissive snort, entirely focused on its search for fresh spring shoots, and waddles heavily back into the impenetrable depths of the swaying forest. The warrior exhales a long, incredibly slow breath, the tense muscles in his shoulders finally dropping. His thumb slides the heavy iron handguard back, allowing the curved steel blade to slip the final fraction of an inch into its dark lacquered scabbard with a barely audible, deeply comforting click. He gently relaxes the pressure of his knees against the horse's flanks, and the powerful animal steps forward once again, continuing the quiet patrol as the hypnotic, rushing sound of the wind in the upper canopy resumes its endless song. The narrow dirt path eventually begins to slope upward, carrying the warrior away from the damp, spongy floor of the bamboo forest. The incredibly rich, dark soil slowly transitions into hard, packed earth, heavily littered with sharp grey shards of broken slate. The dense, suffocating green twilight is suddenly pierced by brilliant shafts of golden sunlight. As the bamboo gives way to a truly ancient, mixed woodland of towering, thick-trunked oak trees and majestic Japanese cedars, known as sugi. The air up here is noticeably cooler, losing the heavy, humid weight of the valley floor, now carrying the crisp, sharp scent of raw, exposed stone, and the faint, unmistakable metallic smell of fast-moving water. He is slowly approaching the extreme northern boundary of his clan's agricultural territory, a formidable natural border carved directly into the earth over thousands of years by a deep, powerful mountain river. He rides in absolute solitude, his horse picking its way carefully up the increasingly steep, rocky trail. The rhythmic clopping of hooves against the stone echoing softly through the quiet, sun-dappled woodland. The distant, low murmur of the river gradually swells into a heavy, continuous roar as the warrior finally emerges from the tree line, arriving at the sheer edge of a terrifyingly deep, rocky gorge. He halts his horse at the precipice, looking down into the dizzying depths. Far below, the immense volume of spring meltwater churns and boils in incredible, chaotic shades of deep, glacial turquoise and brilliant, frothy white. The water smashes violently against huge, jagged black boulders, throwing heavy clouds of freezing mist high into the air, creating tiny, fleeting rainbows that dance and vanish in the bright sunlight. The warrior sits quietly in his wooden saddle, deeply mesmerized by the raw, terrifying power of the rushing water. It is yet another profound reflection of the dual nature of the world he inhabits. The very same water that peacefully floods the rice paddies below, giving life to his entire domain, is also a highly destructive, unstoppable force capable of carving solid mountains into dust. Spanning this dangerous, roaring gap is a narrow, highly precarious suspension bridge, made entirely of thick, twisting vines and heavily weathered wooden planks. The bridge sways gently and continuously in the strong updraft of the gorge, looking incredibly fragile against the terrifying drop. The warrior spends a long, quiet hour carefully inspecting the heavy hemp ropes, anchoring the bridge to the stone on his side of the gorge, ensuring the vital boundary is completely secure and bears no signs of secret crossing or tampering by rival scouts. Satisfied that the northern border remains completely undisturbed, he turns his horse away from the dangerous cliff edge and follows a small, hidden winding trail that traces the path of the river upstream. As they move further away from the violent rapids, the deafening roar of the water slowly softens into a highly musical, gentle bubbling, soothing the warrior's senses. Hidden incredibly deep within a quiet, dark grove of some of the oldest, most massive cedar trees in the entire province, the warrior arrives at a small, entirely forgotten Shinto shrine. There are no large, brightly painted buildings here, no busy priests or loud festival crowds. It is a deeply isolated, solitary place of ancient, quiet worship dedicated to a local, nameless kami, a spirit of the mountain and the rushing water. The entrance to this sacred space is marked by a simple torii gate, constructed from thick, unpainted tree trunks. Over the long centuries, the wood has been completely bleached by the sun and rain to a beautiful, ghostly shade of silvery grey, and the entire structure is now heavily draped in incredibly thick, vibrant green velvet moss that makes the gate look as though it grew directly out of the stone beneath it. The warrior dismounts smoothly, tying the horse's leather reins loosely to the low, sweeping branch of a nearby cedar tree. He approaches the invisible, sacred boundary of the torii gate with profound, slow reverence, removing his wide woven straw hat and bowing deeply from the waist. Before stepping carefully through the wooden pillars, the atmosphere instantly changes as he crosses the threshold. The air inside the shrine grounds feels incredibly heavy, ancient, and undeniably holy, insulated from the loud, busy mortal world by the thick, towering trunks of the surrounding trees. The ground is completely covered in a flawless, undisturbed carpet of soft, green moss, broken only by a narrow path of smooth, flat, grey stepping stones leading toward the small main sanctuary. He walks incredibly slowly, his soft footsteps making absolutely no sound on the stones, not wishing to disturb the profound, heavy silence that blankets this hidden, sacred grove. Before approaching the main wooden structure, he stops at a low, beautifully carved stone basin known as a chozuya, a place for absolute physical and spiritual purification. A long, hollowed piece of green bamboo acts as a pipe, directing a continuous, gentle stream of crystal clear, freezing water directly from a hidden mountain spring into the dark, mossy basin. The sound of the water trickling over the smooth stone lip is incredibly delicate and musical. Resting across the top of the basin is a simple, long-handled wooden ladle. The warrior gently lifts the ladle, feeling the smooth, water-worn wood against his calloused palms. He fills the wooden cup with the freezing spring water and carefully pours a small, precise amount over his left hand, washing away the physical dust of the long patrol. He switches the ladle and repeats the slow, deliberate motion over his right hand. Finally, he pours a small pool of the freezing water directly into his cupped left hand, raising it to his mouth to rinse his lips, spitting the water carefully and respectfully onto the smooth, dark river stones at the base of the basin. The shocking, biting coldness of the spring water instantly sharpens his mind, effectively washing away all mundane, lingering thoughts of agricultural taxes, roaming bandits, or the heavy weight of his daily duties, leaving his spirit completely clean, clear, and empty, purified. He walks slowly toward the small wooden main shrine. The building is incredibly humble, constructed of dark, weathered wood, with a steeply pitched roof made of tightly bound, dry cypress bark. Flanking the worn wooden steps leading up to the closed sanctuary doors are two ancient komainu, highly stylized stone guardian lion dogs. They have sat in this exact damp spot for hundreds of years, enduring countless freezing winters and humid summers. Their fierce, snarling faces, once sharply carved in aggressive, protective expressions, have been completely softened and worn round by centuries of relentless rain. They are now covered entirely in thick coats of pale green lichen and dark moss, making them look like sleeping, furry beasts born directly from the forest floor. The warrior stops at the base of the wooden steps. He reaches into his sleeve and retrieves a small round copper coin with a square hole cut in the absolute center. He tosses it gently into the slatted wooden offering box sitting on the porch. The coin lands with a sharp, echoing clatter, the metallic sound ringing out loudly against the quiet background of the whispering cedar trees. He reaches up and grasps a thick, heavy rope tightly woven from pale hemp fibers, which hangs directly down from the eaves of the roof. At the top of this thick rope is a large, dull brass bell. He gives the rope a firm, highly deliberate swing, causing the heavy wooden clapper to strike the brass. The bell lets out a resonant, slightly flat, vibrating gong that echoes deeply through the quiet forest, a physical, auditory signal calling the attention of the slumbering mountain spirit. Stepping back softly on the mossy stones, he bows completely in half, holding the deep position of respect for a long moment. He stands, bringing his calloused hands up to his chest, and claps them sharply together, exactly twice. The loud, sharp cracks act exactly like the striking bell, piercing the quiet air and focusing his wandering spirit. He closes his eyes tightly and bows his head, entering a state of absolute, silent prayer. He asks for nothing selfish. He asks only for the continued safety of the flooded, shining valley below, for the deep strength required to protect the vulnerable, bending rice shoots, and for the unwavering, quiet courage needed to draw his new, beautiful blade without hesitation. If the terrifying shadows of the world ever threaten to breach the borders of his peaceful home, he lowers his hands from his chest, his prayer complete, and turns away from the moss-covered sanctuary, stepping softly back down the weathered wooden stairs. The deep, heavy silence of the ancient cedar grove seems to press in even closer as he walks back down the narrow path of smooth, grey stepping stones, passing once more through the ghostly, moss-draped torii gate. He unties his waiting horse, mounting slowly, and begins the long, winding descent back toward the valley floor. The bright, sharp brilliance of the spring afternoon is already beginning to soften, the sun dipping lower behind the jagged western peaks, casting long, incredibly complex shadows through the mixed woodland. By the time he finally reaches the sweeping agricultural basin of his home, the flooded rice paddies are glowing with the fiery, deeply vibrant oranges and soft, bruised purples of the twilight sky. The frantic, exhausting energy of the planting season has passed, replaced by a profound, watchful waiting. The tiny, fragile green shoots stand in perfect, organized rows in the still, glassy water, utterly dependent on the changing of the winds. As the brief, beautiful weeks of late spring slip away, the crisp, clear air grows increasingly heavy, thick, and suffocatingly humid. The vast blue skies are slowly swallowed by a relentless, unbroken ceiling of heavy, slate-grey clouds that roll in from the warm southern oceans, trapping the heat in the valley like a thick woolen blanket. This is the arrival of the Tsuyu, the deeply vital, yet incredibly oppressive rainy season, known beautifully as the Plum rain, named for the exact time of year when the local mountain plums ripen and fall to the damp earth. The transition begins not with a violent storm, but with a sudden, profound drop in the wind, followed by a heavy, almost unbearable stillness. Then, the first massive warm drops begin to fall, striking the dry, swept dirt of the courtyard with loud, heavy thuds, kicking up tiny puffs of fine dust. The distinct, incredibly sweet, and metallic scent of petrichor, the smell of dry earth drinking in the sudden moisture, fills the heavy air. Within hours, the scattered drops transition into a steady, relentless, and completely unbroken deluge that will last for many long, dark weeks. The world outside the warrior's veranda completely dissolves into a watery, blurred grey landscape. The sound of the Tsuyu is absolute and all-encompassing, a deafening, continuous, and deeply hypnotic drumming against the thick, thatched roofs of the estate. The gutters overflow instantly, sending thick ropes of muddy water plunging into the flooded courtyard, forming deep, splashing puddles that dance constantly under the relentless downpour. For the samurai, this season marks a dramatic, enforced shift in his daily life. The muddy, flooded mountain passes become incredibly treacherous, essentially halting all long patrols, bandit raids, and territorial skirmishes. The deep, heavy mud traps everyone exactly where they are. The warrior is forced to retreat entirely indoors, trading the vast, open spaces of the dangerous frontier for the quiet, intimate, and deeply shadowed rooms of his wooden home. Yet, a samurai is never truly idle. The strict, unyielding discipline that guides his hand on the bow, and the sword must now be turned inward, applied perfectly to the quiet, slow, and incredibly meticulous maintenance of his mind and his equipment. The relentless, suffocating humidity of the Plum rain is the greatest natural enemy of the warrior's most precious possessions. If left unchecked, the dampness will quickly rot the beautiful silk lacing of his armor and bloom aggressive, spreading rust across the flawless, mirror-like polish of his blades. To combat this invisible enemy, the servants keep small, portable ceramic braziers known as hibachi, constantly burning in the corners of the dim rooms. These braziers are filled with a very special, highly refined white charcoal that burns with an intense, clean heat, producing absolutely no smoke, working tirelessly to bake the dampness out of the heavy indoor air. The warrior spends countless, slow hours seated on the dry tatami mats, painstakingly inspecting every single piece of his heavy O-yoroi armor. He uses a small, incredibly soft brush, made of fine horsehair, to gently sweep away any hidden dust, trapped in the tight diamond knots of the deep indigo silk lacing. He checks the thick, protective black lacquer, covering the hundreds of iron scales, searching carefully for the tiniest crack or chip where the destructive moisture might silently take hold. The slow, repetitive, sweeping motion of the soft brush against the hard scales becomes yet another form of moving meditation, a quiet, protective ritual performed to the endless, rushing soundtrack of the pouring rain outside. When the armor is finally deemed safe and returned to its heavy, raised wooden storage chest, he turns his focused attention to a much more delicate, highly refined art form, a practice designed specifically to sharpen the mind and soothe the spirit during the long, dark, rain-soaked days. He brings out a small, exquisite, deeply lacquered wooden box containing the incredibly precise tools used for Kodo, the ancient and deeply respected art of incense listening. To the samurai, one does not merely smell the fragrant wood. One must quiet the mind entirely and actively listen to the complex story the scent is trying to tell. He places a small, beautiful ceramic censer directly in front of him. Using a pair of incredibly tiny, delicate brass tongs, he carefully buries a single, glowing square of special, odorless bamboo charcoal deep into the center of a mound of pure, white volcanic ash. He uses a tiny, flat brass spatula to meticulously shape the white ash into a perfect, flawless, incredibly steep volcanic cone, leaving only a tiny, microscopic vent hole at the very peak to allow the immense heat from the buried charcoal to travel straight upward. With agonizing slowness and absolute precision, he places a paper-thin square of natural mica, a heat-resistant mineral, directly over the tiny vent hole at the peak of the white ash cone. Finally, using a small set of silver tweezers, he selects a microscopic sliver of incredibly rare, ancient agarwood, a fragrant, resin-dense wood imported from the deep, humid jungles of distant continents, worth far more than its exact weight in pure gold. He rests this tiny, fragile sliver directly onto the hot mica plate. The wood does not burn, nor does he produce any visible smoke. Instead, the gentle, controlled, indirect heat, slowly coaxed from the buried charcoal, causes the incredibly rich, ancient resins trapped completely inside the wood to gently warm and release their invisible fragrance into the humid air. The warrior leans forward slowly, resting his elbows on his knees, and cups his large, calloused hands gently around the small ceramic censer, capturing the rising warmth. He lowers his head, completely closing his eyes, and takes a slow, incredibly deep, controlled breath through his nose. The scent that fills his senses is profoundly complex, a rich, dark, earthy fragrance layered heavily with sharp, spicy notes of sweet balsam, deep vanilla, and damp, ancient forest soil. It is a deeply grounding, ancient smell that immediately transports his mind far away from the relentless, drumming rain on the roof, carrying his spirit deep into the quiet, untouched heart of a forgotten, ancient woodland. He listens to the changing profile of the warm scent as the microscopic resins slowly cook away, isolating every single individual note in his mind, training his senses to be just as sharp, just as impossibly acute as they must be on a terrifying, chaotic battlefield. This quiet, solitary practice of Kodo requires immense, unwavering patience, forcing the warrior to remain perfectly, completely still, focusing his entire being on something entirely invisible and beautifully fleeting. As the long grey afternoon eventually bleeds into an even darker, heavy evening, the rain shows absolutely no signs of stopping. The warrior is joined in his dim chambers by his most senior retainer, an elderly, deeply scarred man who has served the family loyally for over 4 decades. The old man moves with a slow, stiff grace, bowing deeply as he enters the room, carrying a massive, incredibly thick wooden block, perfectly carved from a single, beautiful piece of pale golden kaya wood. This is the goban, the traditional board used for the ancient, highly strategic game of Go. The two men sit silently across from one another, the thick wooden board resting between them on the floor. On the board is a perfectly drawn, incredibly precise grid of thin, intersecting black lines. Beside the board sit 2 smooth, hollowed wooden bowls. The warrior's bowl is filled with small, perfectly round, convex stones made from pure, matte black mountain slate. The elderly retainer's bowl is filled with stones, carved from flawless, polished white clamshells, gleaming softly in the dim, flickering light of the indoor oil lamps. They do not speak a single word. The game begins with a deeply respectful bow. The warrior reaches into his wooden bowl, resting the cool, smooth slate between his index and middle fingers. He surveys the completely empty, vast wooden grid, his mind instantly shifting from the peaceful, floating world of the fragrant incense to the harsh, calculating, and deeply strategic realm of territory and conflict. He places his first black stone carefully onto a specific intersection of the lines, pressing it down with a firm, highly deliberate snap. The crisp, sharp click of the hard mountain slate, striking the solid kaya wood, rings out clearly in the room, cutting sharply through the continuous, heavy drone of the falling rain. The old man pauses, his weathered eyes scanning the board, before responding with a white clamshell stone, placing it with an equally satisfying, sharp click. The game is incredibly slow, a silent, deeply intellectual conversation, played out entirely through the careful, deliberate placement of the stones. To the samurai, the game of Go is not merely a pleasant pastime to endure the rainy season. It is a profound, incredibly complex simulation of real warfare. It teaches the vital, necessary balance between aggressive expansion and cautious, heavily fortified defense. It forces the warrior to look at the entire, vast battlefield, predicting his opponent's movements a dozen steps into the unseen future, sacrificing small, meaningless territories to secure a massive, decisive, and overwhelming victory. The black and white stones slowly spread across the pale wooden board like 2 opposing armies, clashing on a perfectly flat plain. The hours slip away entirely unnoticed. The only sounds in the dim, warm room are the deep, rhythmic breathing of the 2 heavily focused men, the endless, rushing waterfall of the Plum rain outside, and the sharp, rhythmic, hypnotic clicking of the beautiful stones. By the time the complex game finally reaches its natural, silent conclusion, the night is incredibly deep, dark, and overwhelmingly heavy. The old man bows deeply once more, acknowledging his defeat with quiet, dignified grace, and slowly begins the meticulous process of sorting the beautiful stones back into their respective wooden bowls. He leaves the warrior completely alone in the dim, warm light of the charcoal braziers. The warrior finally prepares for sleep, unrolling his soft cotton futon onto the dry, golden tatami mats. He lies down, pulling a light, breathable hemp blanket over his chest. In the profound, heavy darkness of the Tsuyu night, the sound of the rain is joined by a truly deafening, incredible chorus rising up from the flooded rice paddies below the estate. Thousands upon thousands of tiny mountain frogs, rejoicing completely in the endless, life-giving water, sing together in a massive, throbbing, rhythmic wall of sound. It is a loud, chaotic, incredibly beautiful song of sheer survival and overwhelming natural abundance. The warrior closes his eyes, letting the heavy, continuous roar of the falling rain and the rhythmic, throbbing song of the flooded earth wash over his tired mind, pulling him gently downward into a deep, dreamless, and profoundly restorative sleep. The relentless, drumming rhythm of the Plum rain eventually begins to lose its heavy, persistent intensity, transitioning from a deafening, continuous deluge into a series of soft, misty, and fleeting showers that dance sporadically across the landscape. The intense, oppressive heat of the early summer begins to break, giving way to a noticeably lighter, more energetic air. As the heavy grey cloud cover begins to tear and fracture, revealing the first brilliant glimpses of a truly vast, impossibly high azure sky, the saturated, thriving valley floor explodes with sudden, vibrant activity. The tiny green rice shoots have grown incredibly fast, transforming the muddy, flooded paddies into a lush, perfectly manicured, emerald green carpet that ripples and waves hypnotically whenever a breeze sweeps down from the mountain slopes. The warrior, released from his long, confined period of indoor maintenance and ritual, feels the urgent, magnetic pull of the open, wild frontier once again. He prepares for his return to the borderlands, his spirit feeling strangely light and remarkably clear, as if the long, wet season has washed away the last traces of lingering hesitation. He leaves the estate during the quiet, magical hour of the early morning, when the rising sun paints the lingering, low-hanging mist in brilliant shades of soft gold and iridescent pink. The forest is completely alive with the frantic, jubilant song of returning birds, their complex, overlapping melodies filling the cool, damp air. He rides his horse slowly along the winding, narrow path that leads back toward the high, forested northern boundary. The mud on the path has begun to harden and bake in the increasing sun, making for a much faster, more confident pace. As he travels, he notices the profound, invisible changes the rain has forced upon the wild landscape. The small, rocky creeks he once crossed with ease are now surging, powerful torrents, and the undergrowth has become impossibly dense, vibrant, and tangled. The warrior remains hyper-aware, his gaze constantly sweeping the dark, shifting shadows for any signs of movement, his hand resting with a new, deeper comfort on the familiar, indigo-wrapped hilt of his curved blade. Upon reaching the high, rocky gorge that marks the northern edge of his domain, he discovers that the raw, destructive power of the water has left behind a drastically altered landscape. The massive, jagged black boulders that once sat calmly along the riverbank have been shifted, tumbled, and rearranged by the incredible force of the surging floodwaters, creating entirely new, treacherous rapids and swirling, dangerous whirlpools. The suspension bridge of vines and weathered planks, which he so carefully inspected before the rainy season, has been torn away entirely, leaving only frayed, dangling hemp ropes, swinging uselessly in the sharp, cold updraft. The warrior dismounts and walks carefully to the edge of the abyss, his boots crunching on the wet, loose slate. He stands perfectly still for a long time, watching the turbulent, churning water below. This loss of the bridge is a significant challenge, as it was the primary, direct path for his retainers to reach the northern lookout points. He must now find a new alternative route through the steep, treacherous mountain terrain, a task that will require him to spend many long days mapping the hidden, overgrown goat paths that weave through the deep, rocky woods. He spends the remainder of the summer months engaged in this solitary, grueling work, living for weeks at a time in a simple, temporary mountain camp he constructs in a small, flat clearing near a high, hidden spring. The camp is nothing more than a basic lean-to shelter made of freshly cut, fragrant cedar branches and thick, woven mats, designed only to keep the worst of the night dampness away from his sleeping futon. His life during this time is stripped back to the absolute, vital essentials. He hunts small forest game, gathers wild, bitter mountain herbs, and drinks the incredibly cold, sweet water directly from the mountain source. He spends his days slowly and methodically, hacking through the dense, tangled, vine-covered undergrowth with a heavy, sharp-edged billhook, laboriously marking a new, safer trail that avoids the most dangerous sections of the gorge. This is not the life of a grand lord, but the humble, back-breaking, and profoundly essential work of a protector, ensuring the safety and connectivity of his people. The physical toll of this life is significant, yet the warrior finds a deep, quiet satisfaction in the relentless, rhythmic exertion. His body grows lean, hard, and incredibly resilient, his skin bronzed and weathered by the intense, direct mountain sun. His mind, completely stripped of all the complex, indoor social rituals of the estate, becomes as sharp, clean, and uncomplicated as the polished steel blade he carries at his side. He often stands at the edge of a high, lonely precipice as the sun sets, watching the vast, rolling ocean of forested mountains fade into a deep, impenetrable wall of indigo. He is completely alone, yet he has never felt more connected to the land. In these quiet, isolated heights, he realizes that the true strength of the samurai does not come from the armor he wears or the weapons he wields, but from this deep, visceral, and completely unshakable understanding of the rugged earth he has sworn to defend. He learns to read the land like a familiar, ancient scroll, identifying the subtle, almost invisible signs of changing weather, the hidden paths of wild animals, and the slow, inevitable movement of the mountain itself. As the summer slowly begins to wane, the days becoming noticeably shorter, and the air at night carrying the first faint chilling promise of the coming autumn, the warrior finally finishes marking the new trail. It is a long, winding, and highly strategic path that stays well above the reach of even the most extreme flooding, offering a clear, commanding view of the valley below. He returns to his permanent estate just as the intense, vibrant green of the rice paddies begins to shift into a deep, rich, golden yellow. The harvest season is rapidly approaching, and the entire valley is vibrating with a quiet, anxious anticipation. He arrives back home, dusty, lean, and intensely focused, his appearance a stark contrast to the slightly softer, more introspective man who retreated indoors for the Plum rain. He is met not with surprise, but with deep, quiet respect by his retainers, who see in his steady, calm gaze and his effortless, grounded posture the unmistakable, hard-won authority of a man who has truly mastered the wild, unforgiving geography of his own domain. He goes immediately to his chambers, but he does not rest. He sits by the hearth, drawing his sword to carefully clean and re-oil it. The scent of the clove oil instantly grounding him back in the familiar, quiet rhythm of his home. He knows that with the arrival of the harvest, the valley will once again become a target for those who seek to take by force what they have not worked to grow. He is ready. The golden transformation of the valley floor is not merely a visual shift. It is a profound alteration of the entire spirit of the estate, signaling the most vital and demanding time of the year. The heavy, humid atmosphere of the summer finally breaks, replaced by a crisp, exhilarating breeze that carries the scent of dry, sun-baked straw and the faint, sweet promise of cooling nights. The rice stalks, once vibrant green, have ripened into a brilliant, heavy gold, bowing their heads low toward the earth. As if in a gesture of humble gratitude, the warrior stands at the edge of the terraced fields, watching as the villagers begin the harvest. It is a massive, communal effort that begins before the sun has even crested the eastern ridge. The entire village works in perfect, synchronized harmony, their movements as fluid and practiced as the dance of the cherry blossoms in the spring. The primary sound of this season is the sharp, rhythmic, and incredibly satisfying rasp of the iron scythes as they bite through the dry, hollow stems of the rice. It is a metallic, percussive sound that repeats thousands of times a day, echoing against the quiet slopes of the valley, like the steady beating of a great, slow heart. The harvesters move in tight, efficient lines, cutting the stalks close to the ground, gathering the golden bounty into neat, manageable sheaves. These sheaves are then tied tightly with flexible strips of bamboo and hung over horizontal wooden racks, erected specifically for the drying process. As the sun climbs higher, the air becomes thick with the smell of the drying grain, a warm, dusty, and deeply comforting scent that seems to permeate everything, settling into the warrior's clothes and even the wooden timbers of the house. He does not participate in the cutting, for his hands are reserved for a different form of vigilance. Instead, he patrols the perimeter of the vast open fields, walking slowly along the narrow, raised dirt paths that separate the terraces. His presence is a silent, reassuring anchor for the harvesters, a clear signal that the fruits of their immense, back-breaking labor are under absolute protection. He observes the rhythmic, unhurried pace of the work, noting how the villagers take short, necessary breaks to sit in the shade of the forest edge, drinking water from clay jars, and eating small, simple portions of salted pickles and cold rice. They laugh and share soft, hushed stories, their exhaustion washed away by the sheer, overwhelming joy of a successful, abundant harvest. It is a time of immense, quiet celebration, a deep, collective exhale after the long, anxious months of waiting and tending. As the sun begins its slow descent, painting the golden fields in long, dramatic, and deeply saturated amber light, the intensity of the work begins to wane. The laborers stack the drying sheaves in neat, precise rows, creating miniature, golden fortresses that glow brilliantly against the darkening earth. The warrior remains at his post until the very last villager has retreated back to the village hearths, leaving the fields in a state of perfectly ordered stillness. The evening air cools rapidly, forcing him to pull his light, woven hemp jacket closer around his chest. He stands alone in the center of the vast, harvested valley, surrounded by the scent of the dry straw and the absolute, profound quiet of the approaching night. The stars begin to prick through the fading blue of the sky, sharp, cold, and brilliant, mirroring the silver light, reflecting off the winding, narrow river that cuts through the center of his domain. He returns to the estate to find the main house already alive with the quiet, warm activity of the evening meal. The scent of roasting root vegetables and fresh, nutty-smelling new rice fills the air, a welcome, grounding aroma that instantly speaks of safety and replenishment. He enters his private chambers, the quiet solitude of his room, offering a sharp, necessary contrast to the busy, communal energy of the valley. He places his curved sword on the rack, but he does not sit to relax. He instead moves to the small, square window, sliding it open to watch the harvest moon rise. It is full, heavy, and a deep, burnished orange, hanging just above the jagged black silhouettes of the mountain peaks. The light it casts is silver and ghostly, washing over the stacks of drying rice and the empty, stubble-filled fields, turning the world into a strange, dreamlike landscape of shadow and light. This is the season when the spirits of the ancestors are said to return to the world, attracted by the abundant harvest and the thin, cooling veil between the living and the dead. The warrior sits on the wooden floor, his back resting against the cool, solid pillar of the wall, and closes his eyes, sinking into the familiar, heavy silence of his meditation. He does not seek the spirits, nor does he fear them. He simply sits in the quiet awareness of their presence, acknowledging the long, unbroken line of guardians who stood in this exact spot before him, watching over this exact same valley, harvesting this exact same grain. The boundary between himself and the generations past feels incredibly thin tonight, as if he could reach out his hand and touch the rough, calloused fingers of the men who built the first terrace, who fought the first battle, and who first realized the profound, heavy duty of protecting the fragile, golden life growing in the mud. The night deepens, the temperature dropping steadily, until the air carries the sharp, unmistakable sting of the first light frost. The distant, rhythmic song of the last summer insects has finally faded away, replaced by the deep, hollow, and haunting calls of night birds wheeling high above the darkening forest. The warrior lies down on his futon, the familiar, dry rustle of the tatami mats beneath him, offering a deep, earthy comfort. He pulls the heavy, warm quilt up to his chin, his mind slowly unwinding from the days-long, vigilant patrol. The exhaustion of the harvest season, the crisp clarity of the cooling air, and the deep, abiding sense of fulfillment from a successful season of growth pull at his consciousness, urging him into a state of profound, heavy stillness. The house settles around him, the cooling wooden beams creaking softly as they contract in the frost, a gentle, rhythmic sound that echoes the creaking of the drying rice sheaves out in the fields. He drifts towards sleep, his thoughts settling like dust in a shaft of moonlight. He is no longer thinking of the patrol, the scythes, or the distant, watching spirits. He is simply a part of the valley itself, a single, grounded element in the vast, cycling rhythm of the turning season. The profound, heavy weight of his sword, resting silently on its rack, is the only reminder of the duty that will greet him again when the sun rises. For now, there is only the cooling night, the scent of the drying harvest, and the deep, restorative darkness that wraps itself around him, as quiet and as complete as the winter snow that will eventually come to cover all of this, resetting the world once again. The frost on the morning window pane the next day is a delicate, fern-like pattern of ice, a cold testament to the shifting season. The sun rises much later now, pulling itself sluggishly over the eastern ridge and bathing the valley in a cool, pale, and incredibly thin light. The harvest is complete, and the golden sheaves are no longer in the fields. They have been moved, through days of back-breaking, rhythmic labor, into the large, raised wooden storehouses that line the courtyard of the estate. These storehouses are built high off the damp ground on thick, smooth wooden pillars to protect the precious grain from hungry rats and the pervasive, creeping moisture of the earth. The warrior spends his days overseeing the weighing and measuring of the rice, the koku, ensuring that every sack is properly labeled and accounted for. This is the true, heavy weight of his duty. The grain stored within these wooden walls is the direct foundation of his family's survival, their ability to pay their own debts to the distant, unseen capital, and their capacity to maintain the few retainers who guard their borders. He handles the straw sacks with the same careful, reverent touch he uses on his sword, aware that this silent, unmoving wealth is the reason his life of disciplined meditation is even possible. As the last of the harvest is secured, the landscape around the estate undergoes a breathtaking, fiery transformation. The deep, dark greens of the summer forest, which once hid the secrets of the bamboo groves and the quiet shrines, are suddenly and dramatically abandoned. The maples, oaks, and ginkgo trees that line the mountain slopes explode into an overwhelming, vivid array of brilliant crimson, burnt orange, and bright metallic gold. This is the season of Koyo, the magnificent, fleeting parade of color that marks the final, dramatic act of the natural world before the long sleep of winter. The air is incredibly crisp and dry, carrying the scent of drying wood, wood smoke, and the faint, earthy musk of fallen leaves crunching softly underfoot every time the wind moves through the valley. It carries a swirling, multicolored blizzard of leaves, raining down upon the courtyard in a graceful, endless descent. The warrior walks through his grounds, the bright colors reflecting in the dark, still water of the decorative stone basins, feeling the melancholy, beautiful weight of the changing season. He begins the process of winterizing the estate, a task that requires as much focus and planning as any strategic military maneuver. He inspects the thick, thatched roofs for any potential leaks, working with the village master builder to ensure the layers of dried grass are dense enough to shed the heavy, wet snows that are sure to come. They climb up onto the steeply pitched roofs, moving with practiced, careful balance, securing loose bundles with woven ropes. From this high vantage point, the warrior can see the entire valley, the golden stubble of the harvested fields, looking like a vast, flat, and empty plain against the towering, colorful mountains. It is a lonely, expansive view, one that reminds him of his position as the solitary watcher of this domain. He descends slowly, his heavy boots clattering against the wooden rungs of the ladder, and moves to the stables to check the grain supplies for his horse, ensuring the animal is well fed and protected against the coming freeze. The nights grow longer and significantly colder, forcing him to spend more time inside his private chambers, where the square hearth fire is kept burning from dawn until deep into the night. He begins to transition his daily practice, moving away from the outdoor patrols and the physical maintenance of the landscape to the indoor, intellectual, and spiritual preparation for the winter. He takes down his extensive collection of scrolls, the brush-painted ink stories of legendary warriors and ancient poets, and lays them out on his low desk. He spends hours reading, his fingers tracing the fluid, elegant kanji characters, as he absorbs the wisdom of those who lived before him. He reflects on the concept of Bushido, which is still in its early, unwritten, and highly flexible form, a collection of local customs and personal standards that emphasize loyalty, self-discipline, and the unwavering protection of one's own people. He is not a man who seeks out combat, but he is a man who understands that in a world of shifting political alliances and scarce resources, the ability to protect what is precious must be held in the heart with absolute, uncompromising strength. During these long, quiet evenings, he is often visited by the village headman, a man of similar age, whose family has lived on this land for generations, almost as long as the warrior's own. They sit by the glowing hearth, the tea kettle bubbling softly in the background, and discuss the practical realities of the coming winter. They map out the distribution of the rice, ensuring that every family in the village has enough to sustain them through the hardest, coldest months. They discuss the needs of the elderly, the maintenance of the village irrigation channels, and the state of the mountain paths that will soon be blocked by snow. This is the other half of the warrior's duty. He is not a distant, fearsome master, but a responsible, engaged protector who is intimately tied to the daily survival of the villagers. He listens to the headman's concerns with profound patience, his presence serving as a stable, calm force amidst the uncertainties of the season. The warrior also takes this time to refine his own gear, specifically his winter clothing. He brings out his heavy, layered robes of padded cotton and silk, checking the stitching and ensuring the warmth is evenly distributed. He cleans and re-oils his sword one last time, the smell of the clove oil once again filling the room, creating a familiar, comforting sanctuary. He feels a strange, quiet sense of contentment during this time, the chaos of the planting, the anxiety of the harvest, and the constant vigilance of the patrols have all settled into a smooth, rhythmic cadence. He is ready for the stillness. He is ready for the deep, suffocating, yet profoundly restorative winter that will eventually lock the valley in ice and silence. He knows that this, too, is a part of the cycle. One cannot always be active, always growing, always guarding. There must be a time to rest, a time to store the energy of the earth, and a time to allow the mind to settle into the void. As he prepares for bed, he leaves the sliding paper door to the veranda, cracked open just a few inches, allowing the cold, sharp air of late autumn to drift into the room. He lies down on his futon, the heavy, warm blankets up to his shoulders. Outside, the moon is obscured by a thin, wispy veil of high, freezing clouds, and the wind makes a low, hollow sound as it whistles through the cracks in the wooden walls. He listens to the world outside, hearing the occasional, sharp crack of a dry branch in the forest and the distant, mournful call of a mountain owl. It is a cold, lonely, and deeply beautiful sound, one that perfectly matches the quiet, solitary rhythm of his own life. He feels the day's fatigue slowly creeping into his limbs, a heavy, pleasant weight that signals the end of the work. He closes his eyes, his breathing falling into the slow, steady pattern of sleep, letting the darkness of the late autumn night wrap him in its cold, protective embrace. The air the next morning is not just cold. It is biting, sharp, and unmistakably heavy with the scent of frozen water. The vibrant, fiery maples of late autumn have been stripped bare overnight by a howling, restless northern wind, leaving the mountain slopes looking skeletal and stark against the pale, bruised sky. The warrior wakes before the sun, feeling the profound drop in temperature through the thin paper walls of his chamber. He rises, moving with his usual practiced silence, and slides open the heavy door to the veranda. The courtyard is completely transformed. The last remaining patches of brown, frozen mud have been covered by a thin, crisp layer of white frost that sparkles like diamond dust under the weak grey light of the dawn. He steps out, his bare feet meeting the freezing wood, and looks up at the sky. The clouds are low, dense, and a deep, oppressive shade of slate, promising the arrival of the first true winter snow. He breathes out, his breath forming a dense, swirling cloud that lingers in the still, frigid air, a physical marker of the life force contained within his own body against the vast, cooling world outside. He spends the morning reinforcing the insulation of the house, hanging thick, woven reed mats over the gaps in the eaves, and ensuring the charcoal stores in the cellar are well protected from the rising damp. The village life, too, has slowed to a crawl. The bustle of the harvest is entirely gone, replaced by a quiet, huddled domesticity. He sees the villagers moving between their homes, wrapped in thick, quilted capes, their movements deliberate and cautious on the slick, frozen paths. The landscape itself seems to be bracing for impact, the trees standing silent and motionless, as if holding their breath, waiting for the sky to release its heavy, white burden. There is no birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. The valley has entered a state of absolute, pre-winter suspension, a fragile, temporary equilibrium before the chaos of the blizzard begins. He returns to his chambers, the fire in the hearth now burning with a constant, reliable heat, and begins a new, long-term project. The transcription of a meditative text onto thin, durable strips of bamboo. This requires incredible focus, the small knife and brush moving in perfect synchronization. His mind completely emptied of the distractions of the outside world, anchored entirely to the rhythm of his breathing and the scratch of the tool against the wood. The room is dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the dancing orange flames of the hearth, and a single, low oil lamp that casts a steady, warm glow over his workspace. He works for hours, the scent of the freshly cut bamboo mixing with the faint, comforting smell of the wood smoke, creating an atmosphere of intense, concentrated peace. He finds that this repetitive, methodical work is the perfect antidote to the encroaching winter darkness, allowing him to maintain his internal clarity even as the world outside turns bleak and inhospitable. As the afternoon light fades into a premature, gloomy twilight, the first flakes begin to fall. They are not the heavy, wet flakes of the spring thaw, but tiny, dry, crystalline stars that drift silently out of the grey sky, dancing in the updrafts, before settling softly onto the frozen ground. The warrior pauses his work, setting down his brush, and rising to stand at the veranda once more. He watches the snowfall intensify, the fine white powder covering the courtyard, the roof tiles, and the distant, dark mountain ridges. In a matter of minutes, the world is being erased, hidden beneath a clean, blank veil. He feels a strange, deep sense of liberation in this transformation. The complex, messy, and demanding world of agricultural cycles, border patrols, and political tensions is being temporarily simplified, distilled down to the fundamental necessity of warmth, shelter, and survival. He slides the heavy wooden door shut, sealing himself into the warm, yellow-lit heart of his home. The sounds of the outside world are quickly muffled, absorbed by the deepening drifts of snow, until the silence inside the room is absolute, total, and profoundly heavy. He moves back to his desk, but he does not resume the writing immediately. He sits for a moment, listening to the silence. It is a living, breathing thing, a presence that fills every corner of the room. He understands that this deep winter is not a time of loss, but a time of vital, hidden growth, a period when the earth itself rests, gathers its strength, and prepares for the inevitable, violent re-emergence of spring. he is no longer just a protector of the valley. He is a witness to its quiet, necessary sleep. He picks up the bamboo strip again, his hand steady, and his mind completely at peace, and begins to write, his brush moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who has learned to trust the rhythm of the seasons, no matter how cold or dark the path may become. The fire crackles, a small, stubborn spark of life against the immense, encroaching cold, and the warrior works on, deep into the night, perfectly content in his solitary, warm and snowbound sanctuary. The nights following the first snowfall are defined by a silence so absolute it feels heavy, a physical weight that presses against the walls of the estate. The storm continues in a sporadic, unpredictable rhythm, with gusts of icy wind driving the snow against the wooden siding in long hissing curtains, followed by hours of dead, breathless stillness. Inside the chamber, the warrior maintains the only life in a frozen world, his focus narrowing down to the tiny, intricate details of the bamboo strips he is transcribing. He moves with a slow, deliberate cadence that has become his entire existence. Each brush stroke is an act of precision, an alignment of his physical body with the ancient wisdom he is preserving. He does not rush, for he knows that to hurry is to invite error, and the samurai's way is to act with a total, singular purpose. As he works, he thinks of the long, storied history of his predecessors, the men who first sat by such hearths in the distant Heian and Kamakura periods, distilling the chaos of their world into the discipline of the martial and aesthetic arts. They were the ones who taught that the true warrior must be as skilled with the inkstone as he is with the blade, for only through the cultivation of the mind can one truly master the violence of the world. He takes a break from his writing, the joints in his fingers slightly stiff from the pervasive cold, and rises to add a fresh piece of charcoal to the hearth. The embers glow with an intense, steady heat, and the new wood catches quickly, casting a bright, dancing light that warms the room's deep shadows. He pours the last of the evening tea, the steam rising in delicate, curling ribbons before vanishing into the rafters. In the depths of this winter, he practices the ancient art of zazen, a seated meditation that is the foundation of his mental fortitude. He sits cross-legged on the thick woven tatami, his back perfectly straight, his eyes half closed, focusing on nothing but the slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction of his chest. This practice, he knows, is essential. It is not about silencing the world, but about silencing the ego, the fear, and the hesitation that lead to error on the battlefield. By practicing this stillness now, in the quiet of his home, he is building an internal reservoir of calm that will be his strongest weapon when the spring winds return and the demands of the world begin to pull at his spirit once again. The historical reality of the samurai is often misunderstood as one of constant battle, but he knows the truth. The life of a warrior is, in reality, a life of profound, often mundane, dedication to duty and maintenance. He thinks of the many layers of his traditional dress, the kimono, which in the winter requires careful, systematic layering to provide warmth without restricting movement. The base layer, a soft, fine cotton, absorbs the sweat of his labor, while the heavier silk or wool robes worn above provide the necessary insulation against the mountain air. Every knot, every fold, and every tie is performed with a specific, learned intention, a vestige of the military need to be ready for action in a moment's notice. Even the way he sits, the way he places his hands, and the way he arranges his sword on the rack are all governed by centuries of accumulated custom, designed to foster a state of constant, low-level vigilance that is as natural as his heartbeat. Outside, the wind suddenly picks up, a sharp, mournful howl that rattles the wooden shutters, and sends a shower of snow sliding from the high eaves of the roof with a soft, muffled thud. He does not flinch. He remains in his seated position, his breathing steady, his mind completely unruffled by the sudden change in the weather. The house feels incredibly secure, a small, warm vessel floating in a vast, dark, and frozen sea. He thinks of the village families huddled in their own homes, the smell of their hearth fires, mixing with the scent of the drying winter vegetables. And he feels a deep, quiet comfort in knowing that his vigilance is part of what keeps them safe. The samurai is the pillar that supports the roof, the quiet guardian who watches from the shadows so that others may live in the light. This is his duty, and in this duty he finds a profound, simple, and entirely sufficient meaning. As the late-night hours stretch on, the fire in the hearth begins to die down to a soft, pulsing mound of glowing red embers, casting a deep, comfortable dimness over the room. The warrior finally unfurls his futon, the soft, thick cotton inviting and warm. He lies down, the weight of the day's discipline, and the deep, abiding cold outside, working in tandem to pull him into a state of profound relaxation. He does not fear the dreams that might come, for he has learned to approach the dream world with the same focus and clarity he applies to the waking one. He closes his eyes, the image of the bamboo strips and the glowing embers slowly fading, and allows his consciousness to drift into the absolute restorative void of sleep. The house creaks softly around him. The wind outside continues its low, rhythmic drone, and the warrior sinks into a deep, silent, and entirely peaceful rest, his mind quiet, his duty fulfilled, and his spirit ready for the long, dark winter night. The morning light that filters through the paper screens is dim, grey, and cold, reflecting the absolute stillness of a world buried under deep, undisturbed snow. He wakes not with a start, but with a slow, deliberate return to consciousness, his mind rising from the deep, dark ocean of his rest like a stone, breaking the surface of a still pond. The air in the room is biting, the fire in the hearth having burned down to a fine, white powder of ash during the night. He does not rush to rekindle the flames. Instead, he lingers for a moment in the warmth of his heavy, thick blankets, listening to the small, sharp sounds of the house, the contraction of the wooden beams as the temperature shifts, the soft, rhythmic tapping of ice pellets against the exterior shutters, and the distant, muffled groan of a heavy tree branch bowing under the weight of the accumulated ice. It is a profound, isolated beauty, this midwinter deep, where the world is stripped of all its noise and distraction, leaving only the fundamental reality of endurance. He rises, his movements economical and precise, and dresses quickly in his layered robes, the fabric feeling stiff and cold against his skin. After kindling the fire and setting the water to boil for the morning tea, he turns his attention to his sword, which rests on the rack in the dim corner. He lifts the weapon, its balance familiar and comforting, and carefully removes the scabbard. Today is a day for the meticulous, quiet inspection of the tsuba, the iron handguard that protects his hands. He sits by the light of the hearth, using a small, soft cloth to polish the metal. The tsuba is a work of art in its own right, forged from iron and inlaid with delicate, swirling patterns of silver and gold that depict a landscape of mountains and rushing water, a mirror of the very world he defends. As he works, he studies the intricate details, noting the tiny imperfections, the microscopic scratches earned from years of practice and patrol. Each scratch tells a story of a day spent in the wild, a moment of exertion, or a second of intense focus. He does not seek to hide these marks, for they are the history of his service, the physical record of his life's dedication to the path of the warrior. The morning hours pass in this quiet, solitary rhythm. He eats a simple meal of steamed rice and a small preserved plum, the sharp, salty, and sour taste, waking his senses and grounding him in the present. The cold is a constant, pressing presence, a reminder that the winter is far from over, but he finds no discomfort in it. He has learned to exist within the cold, to accept it as a necessary partner in his life, much like the changing of the seasons themselves. By mid-morning, he decides to venture outside, to clear the heavy snow from the veranda and the path leading to the stables. He dons his thick, straw-woven sandals and a heavy, dark-colored cloak, stepping out into the blinding white world. The air is so cold it feels sharp in his lungs, and the glare from the snow is intense, forcing him to squint against the brilliance. The silence of the forest is absolute, a profound, heavy stillness that makes every small sound. The crunch of his sandals on the crust of the snow, the scrape of his wooden shovel against the stone, seem magnified and strangely intimate. He works steadily, the physical effort quickly warming his blood and sending a comfortable heat through his limbs. The snow is light and powdery, and he clears a neat, narrow path, piling the white drifts in soft, rounded mounds along the side of the courtyard. His eyes scan the landscape as he moves, his senses always alert, though he knows the danger of the winter is not in the form of human threat. The true challenge of this season is the slow, inevitable drain of energy, the way the world seems to pull inward. And he ensures that the barn and the storehouses remain tightly sealed and secure. He spends time in the stables with his horse, grooming the animal's thick winter coat and speaking to it in soft, low tones. The horse is a grounding, living presence, its warm breath and the steady, rhythmic sound of its chewing, providing a necessary contrast to the frozen stillness of the forest. The bond between them is deep, built on years of shared silence, and he finds comfort in the animal's calm, steady endurance of the harsh elements. Returning to the house, he finds the atmosphere inside changed, the fire having warmed the rooms and the scent of the tea brewing on the hearth, creating a welcoming, familiar sanctuary. He spends the afternoon in deep contemplation, reading the old scrolls once again. But this time his focus is on the history of his clan, the tales of his ancestors, who also faced these long, brutal winters in the mountains. He reads of their hardships, their small triumphs, and their quiet, persistent dedication to the land, realizing that he is just one link in an incredibly long, unbroken chain. The winter is not a time of stagnation for him. It is a time of profound internal fortification. He is preparing himself, gathering the clarity, the discipline, and the quiet, iron-willed resolve he will need for the return of the spring. The lessons of the snow, the ice, and the silent, sleeping earth are sinking deep into his spirit, hardening his resolve, and sharpening his mind, readying him for the tasks that will eventually come with the inevitable, rhythmic turn of the world. As the afternoon light begins to fail, the sky taking on a bruised, purplish hue, he sits by the window and watches the falling snow, his mind empty, his heart quiet, and his spirit entirely at rest in the deep, freezing heart of the winter. The relentless, icy grip of midwinter finally begins to falter, though the change is so subtle that only one who has spent every waking hour listening to the voice of the mountain could possibly perceive it. The deep, muffled silence of the frozen forest remains. Yet the quality of the light has shifted ever so slightly. It is no longer the thin, brittle, blue-grey light of deep December, but a pale, creamy luminescence that seems to hold just the faint, distant promise of a warmer sun. The warrior notices this change while standing on the veranda, his breath still pluming in the air, watching as the shadow cast by the main gate retreats a few inches earlier each afternoon. He remains in the quiet, sheltered heart of his estate, yet his mind begins to drift forward, anticipating the inevitable, violent, and beautiful thaw that will soon tear through this frozen stillness. He has spent the long, dark nights refining his inner landscape, and now, as the natural world prepares for its own awakening, he feels a corresponding shift in his own spirit, a quiet stirring of energy and readiness. He turns his attention to the final maintenance tasks of the winter season, preparing the tools that will be needed when the mud finally claims the earth. He spends a day in the workshop, carefully sharpening the blades of his garden tools, the whetstone whispering against the metal in a rhythmic, soothing cadence. He checks the integrity of the irrigation sluices, ensuring that the heavy snowfall has not damaged the wooden barriers that direct the vital mountain water into the terraced paddies. These tasks are the quiet, unglamorous backbone of his life, the necessary work that ensures the survival of the village and the prosperity of the coming harvest. He works with a deep, methodical patience, knowing that the smallest detail overlooked now could result in a catastrophe once the spring rains arrive. The scent of fresh wood shavings and the cool, metallic tang of the sharpening tools fill the air, a grounding, earthy reality that anchors him firmly to the earth. Even as the landscape remains locked in ice, there comes a morning of unexpected, startling clarity. The wind, which has spent the last 2 months howling with the ferocity of a wild beast, suddenly dies completely, leaving the valley in a state of breathless, crystalline suspension. The sky is an impossible, brilliant azure, and the sun, for the first time in many weeks, carries a distinct, tangible warmth. The warrior steps out into the courtyard, his boots crunching on the frozen, crusty surface of the snow. He walks toward the edge of the forest, where the ancient, gnarled plum tree stands. He looks closely at the tightly furled, dark buds on the branches. They are swelling, just barely, with the hidden, pressurized life of the coming spring. The sight is a small, quiet, and profoundly moving miracle. It is the first undeniable sign that the cycle is turning, that the endurance of the winter has been rewarded, and that the world is on the precipice of a violent, glorious rebirth. He stands before the tree for a long time, his hands tucked into his sleeves, his face upturned to the warming sun, feeling the weight of the winter slowly sliding from his shoulders. He returns to the house, but the quiet, introspective atmosphere of the deep winter has begun to lift. He feels a restlessness, a desire to move, to patrol the borders, to see how the river has survived the ice. He knows, however, that the ground is still treacherous, the thawing mud capable of trapping a horse or a man in an instant. He practices restraint, the ultimate discipline of the samurai. He holds his energy in check, allowing the anticipation to build rather than exhausting it in a reckless push into the thawing wild. He spends the afternoon in his chambers, but instead of the quiet, indoor work of calligraphy or meditation, he sits with his sword, not to polish it, but to simply hold it. He practices the draw, the movement fluid, effortless and instantaneous, a testament to the thousands of repetitions he performed during the cold, dark months. The steel flashes in the light, a silver arc of readiness before returning to the scabbard, with a sharp, clear ring that echoes through the room. As the sun sets, casting long, dramatic shadows of violet and gold across the snow, he feels a deep, abiding sense of gratitude for the season of isolation. It has been a time of essential internal architecture, a period of gathering the strength and the clarity necessary for the challenges that lie ahead. The winter has been his teacher, and he has learned well. He is no longer the same man who stood on the veranda in the first freezing days of the year. He is hardened, focused, and profoundly connected to the cyclical nature of his existence. He eats his evening meal with a quiet, meditative intensity, savoring the simple, earthy flavors of the food, and then retires to his futon, his mind already turning toward the first green shoots that will soon pierce the thawing mud. The night is quiet, the cold still present, but the feeling of heavy, oppressive finality has vanished, replaced by a sense of expectant, patient waiting. He drifts into sleep, his heart steady, his resolve unshakable, and his spirit perfectly attuned to the turning of the great, slow wheel of the year. The long, deep breath of the mountain eventually releases its icy hold, and the world begins to weep. It starts with the slow, rhythmic dripping of melting snow from the eaves of the house, a steady, musical beat that announces the return of the water. Soon, the thin crust of snow, covering the valley floor, dissolves into a patchwork of dark, damp earth, and the hidden streams beneath the frozen ground wake, with a sudden, joyful roar, carving new, temporary channels through the thawing soil. The warrior walks through the courtyard, feeling the soft, yielding earth beneath his feet, a sensation that is both familiar and profoundly new. The air is filled with the scent of damp moss, waking roots, and the distant, earthy musk of the forest floor, a rich, complex perfume that signals the absolute end of the winter's silence. He watches as the valley floor, once a barren, frozen plain, begins to show the first, unmistakable signs of life. Tiny, brave green shoots, pushing through the mud, desperate and determined to reach the light. This is the moment he has prepared for, throughout the long, dark months of internal discipline and study. He saddles his horse, the leather of the tack soft and supple, and rides out beyond the gates of the estate, heading toward the high mountain passes. The thaw has been swift, and the landscape is alive with the sound of rushing water, the brooks and creeks swelling into lively, chattering streams that tumble over the slick, wet stones. He travels the new trails he marked in the autumn, navigating the steep, rocky slopes with a confidence born of his intimate knowledge of the terrain. He stops at the edge of the gorge, where the river, once a silent sheet of ice, is now a raging, powerful artery of meltwater, dark and churning with the debris of the winter. He stands at the precipice, watching the raw, chaotic energy of the water, and feels a deep, abiding connection to the land. This is the reality he is sworn to protect. The land as it is, in its terrifying, beautiful, and ever-changing glory. He is not merely a warrior who defends a static border. He is a part of this living, breathing ecosystem, a guardian who understands that his own life, like the spring thaw, is part of a much larger, eternal rhythm. As he patrols the northern limits of the province, he sees the first blossoms on the wild cherry trees, tiny, pale explosions of color against the dark, wet trunks of the cedar forest. The sight brings a faint, genuine smile to his lips, a rare expression of warmth that mirrors the emerging sun. He returns to the estate as the evening shadows lengthen, the air growing cool and sweet. The village below is active, the people already out in the fields, clearing the irrigation channels and preparing the paddies for the coming season. He sees the headman standing in the center of the terrace, directing the labor with the same calm, steady authority he uses to manage the village hearths. There is a sense of continuity here, a feeling that, despite the harshness of the winter, the life of the valley persists, resilient and enduring. He feels a quiet, profound pride in this, a realization that his own dedication is the foundation upon which this persistence is built. He enters his chambers and sets his sword on the rack, the metal clean, oiled, and ready. He does not need to draw it today. There is no threat, no conflict, only the labor of growth and the quiet, steady march of the seasons. He sits by the hearth, the fire now low and domestic, and watches the rising moon, the same moon that shone on the autumn harvest and the deep, silent winter snows. It is a constant, steady presence, a witness to the endless, turning cycles of the world. He understands that his life, as a samurai, is not measured by the battles he fights, but by the peace he protects, the quiet, daily, and often invisible labor he performs to keep the foundation of his people strong. The path of the sword, he realizes, is the path of the hearth, the path of the harvest, and the path of the seasons. It is a path of service, of humility, and of profound, lasting connection to the earth beneath his feet. He lies down on his futon, the house quiet around him. The only sound, the soft, rhythmic pulsing of the spring frogs calling out from the flooded paddies below. The world is waking up, and with it, the duties of his calling will return in full force. The patrols, the training, the complex social obligations, and the constant underlying need for vigilance. But for this moment, there is only the present. He feels the day's fatigue settle into his bones, a pleasant, earned weariness, and as he closes his eyes, he does not look back at the winter, nor does he look forward to the spring. He remains completely, perfectly, in the present, his mind empty of worry, his heart at peace, and his spirit entirely at home in the quiet, unfolding stillness of the night. The wheel of the year continues to turn, eternal and unceasing, and he, the guardian of the valley, drifts into a final, deep, and restorative sleep, knowing that everything he holds dear is safe, nurtured by the slow, enduring rhythm of the life he has sworn to defend.